Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Coffee Break School Psychology. And with me, as always, is coffee. That's right, we always have coffee on Coffee Break School Psychology. But I also have two wonderful guests. I'm delighted to introduce you to Nicole Keller and Angie Zara, and they are the founders of LiveWellEd. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and also, do you have coffee? This is very important.
Always have coffee.
Okay.
I brought up my special mug today.
We came ready.
Yeah.
We're educators. We drink coffee after 5 p.m.
Yes, we are 90% coffee. Yes, I have my Teddy Talks mug, my other podcast for kids, and it says, "Show me the honey." So, we have a deep and wide collection as educators of coffee mugs, and these ladies today have a deep and wide collection of tidbits for you out there about a topic that is so important, about trauma-informed practices. So we hear a ton about trauma-informed practices as educators, and I think a lot of teachers and parents out there listening, they're like, that is for the school psychologist. Thank you very much. That's not really something that's in my lane. Can you both introduce yourselves and just a little bit about how you came to be speaking about trauma-informed practices to educators?
Yeah. So, hi everyone. I'm Nicole Keller. I'm the special education expert at LiveWellEd, and my partner here is Angie Zara. She is the social emotional learning and trauma informed specialist at LiveWellEd. I'm going to tell us a little bit about her background, and she's going to dive in further specifically on the topic today. So we actually met as co-teachers in an inclusive classroom. Angie was the general educator, and I was the special education teacher nearly 10 years ago. We taught for many years together, and including through the pandemic and virtual instruction. After the pandemic, we both went our separate ways into school leadership, actually, and we still kept in touch. And we found ourselves continuing to talk about, what's happening in the classroom in post-pandemic education and what's happening at home with families. And we found that while both parties, the educators and teachers, had the students' best interest at heart, there was a gap of understanding of what's going on at home and what's going on at school. And so from there, after many long conversations and working sessions, we birthed LiveWellEd with the goal to help bridge that gap between caregivers and the school system by empowering our communities with knowledge. And so our services really include that empowerment piece of knowledge and trainings through understanding milestones that children can have, understanding the mindset of trauma-informed practices, the benefits of possible change, and the special education process overall. Next, I'll turn it
Yeah.
over to Angie. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. So, Nicole, we like to think of ourselves we thought about this as teachers in the classroom together, but even now as business partners, where Nicole is like one half of the brain and I'm the other half. So, if Nicole's superpower is special education expertise, mine is really trauma-informed practices. And that came to be really from, as Nicole said, we worked in a full inclusion school. It was a Title I school in Washington, D.C., servicing children from all across Washington, D.C. And for myself, within year two of being in the classroom as a teacher, I realized, as many do, that there were a lot of behaviors that I did not know how to respond to and how to provide support for. And I'll just share a trigger warning throughout this. We are going to talk about some behaviors that can feel really challenging for different educators or different people listening, with the best interest of helping children. And so some of the behaviors that I saw within my first couple years in the classroom were suicidal ideation, self-harm, elopement, which is the education word for leaving the classroom or fleeing multiple times. I remember tracking data and having a student who would elope. At one point, I tracked 23 times within an hour. And this is all on top of managing all of the expectations that we have to provide really great instruction and meet diverse student need and be supportive adults. And I remember grappling with, what do I do? How can I show up to support my students? And talking to administrators in the building at the time who really were grappling to try to find the answers as well. And it was not because people didn't have expertise. It just seemed as though there was a lack of knowledge. And so I really plunged myself into the research, soaked up every podcast I could soak up, started reading all the trauma books. I was even fortunate enough to receive a coaching cycle from an organization in DC that really helped me hone in on the strategies that I could use. And within the first 6 months of implementing these, my whole experience with my students changed, student outcomes changed, behaviors decreased significantly, relationships with families got better. And I would say the one misconception that I think families can stray away from is the word trauma. I think when we think of trauma informed practices, it can feel like it might serve those that are experiencing significant or big T trauma, experiencing several adverse childhood experiences and severe neglect or abuse. But trauma informed practices are what we would call in education a tier 1 strategy and a tier 1 best practice. And so a lot of Nicole and our work as educational leaders and advocates for this mission is really sharing the understanding that trauma informed practices work for everyone and also work for adults. They're best practices for a reason. And when we set the conditions and implement trauma informed practices, we lower the stress of the learning environments that we're in for all stakeholders so that everyone's able to access learning more easily. So I think for me, that's always a really big misconception and something that we like to proactively state around trauma informed practices. They're not just for those experiencing significant trauma.
Right, and it's not also the job of every teacher to be like a trauma hunter. I mean, like, okay, is this behavior because of this
Right.
trauma? And is this trauma? Like, there are practices that help all kids regardless of what types of experiences they've had. And there's ways to set up the classroom, such that it really can nurture all learners no matter what experiences they bring through the school door. So I know as a school psychologist that I, now being in the field 20 plus years, wish I had a time machine so I could go back and give myself what I know now about trauma informed practices, about healing centered practices, about behaviors, about literally everything. Um, I want to have you time travel for a moment with me back to when you were first starting teaching and you're like, I'm going to teach math and reading. And then you're like, there are children leaving the classroom. How am I supposed to teach math and reading? Some sort
Hmm.
of like drops of knowledge that you could go back and give your previous self, just three like pro tips that people out there listening, whether you've been teaching for 10 minutes or 10 years, can take with them.
Yes. Oh my gosh. So there's definitely there's many, but if I could break down three, I would recommend number one, creating time and space in the classroom and in the school day to proactively view the schedule and what's to come, and just give about 3 to 5 minutes for students to ask questions about what they might be anticipating in the day. And the reason this is so effective is because even as adults, we always like to know what's coming next. And it really alleviates anxiety and the need to wonder about what might be around the corner if you just proactively review the daily schedule, especially if there are changes in routines that might look different and be abrupt, because we all like to know if a change is coming in our day to day. So that would be number one. And it's a really low lift. It really could just take 3 to 5 minutes. And if you don't have a fancy schedule and you don't have a pretty laminated schedule, I remember just making blue tape on a whiteboard and just creating a schedule with blue tape and just writing in the times and what was happening in the day, and then just erasing it and rewriting if there were any changes the next day. Number two is within, so I love, Nicole and I love first 6 weeks of school where you have a full 6 weeks to teach procedures and teach routines and practice and model before you have to get into academics. I know working in the school system that I work in now, schools don't always have 6 weeks and teachers don't always have 6 weeks before you have to jump into academics. However, setting time aside to really proactively practice, model, and teach routines, even if it's just the first 2 weeks of school, really helps in reducing behaviors or, again, that anxiety that really any learner, but especially learners who are experiencing more trauma, might be experiencing. So that could mean like, what does walking through my classroom look like? What does a traffic pattern look like? How am I making sure that there's time and space to teach this and practice this? What are the steps when I transition from the my table seat to the carpet? And just making sure that you're thinking through those and practicing them at least one or two times at least before you expect students to do it whole group. And then the last pro tip that I have that I wish I had my first couple years in the classroom, and Nicole and I did this especially in the pandemic, this was a really great move, was the first touch point that families have with a teacher should not be negative. And something that we really strive to do was within the first 6 weeks of school, the first month, have one positive touch point with a parent. It could be an app that you're using that is a school wide app if you're not comfortable giving a phone number, depending on your families, if they respond to email, or I know this is old school, but picking up the phone and just calling, because nothing is more rewarding and better than catching a parent off guard, especially who maybe only receives negative calls with from the new teacher saying, "Hey, I just want to let you know that so and so really showed kindness today and is having a really strong start to the school year, and I'm really excited to work with you this year." And that's it. So those would be the number three high leverage pro tips.
What I love about all of those is they do not require an extensive Pinterest situation.
No, we were not Pinterest
We're,
teachers.
yeah, we're teachers, big teachers, none of that.
Nicole, did you want to add, or maybe you can add a little color commentary to why creating schedules, setting time to practice these sort of normal routines and procedures, and sort of starting out strong with parent communication, how does that help? I mean, I generally get how that helps all kids, but how does it particularly help students who maybe have experienced trauma?
Yeah. Students who have experienced trauma or overall the neurodivergent students in our classroom, the being able to create predictability, cultures, a room of safety, and it's so important to ensure that the students in our classroom feel safe, then they can trust the adults there, and then that opens up their bodies and brains for learning, and then students can really thrive.
Thank you for that. And I think also one of the things that I would love for you to share with me is, there's when we think about trauma informed practices, it sounds like things are, structured and, we're like tuned in to what the kids need and we know our kids and they feel safe in the community. What kind of, I don't know if it's pushback's the right word, but what kind of things when you go to like talk to teachers or educators about trauma informed practice, what are some of their concerns about using this? Because to me, this all sounds like, yes, this is just good teaching. Game on. Is there any like resistance to this?
Yeah, a common misconception that we run into as leaders, but that some colleagues have also shared at, peers as teachers, is that feeling like trauma-informed practices can mean an absence of accountability and consequences. And that really requires, a conversation and maybe some cultivating some buy-in around a reframing of what consequences are. I think people often think of discipline as something punitive, putting a student out of the classroom, suspending a child. But the thing about a trauma informed practitioner is really, if you think of similar to a warm demander or even a restorative practitioner, which is that there are extremely high expectations for children. It is highly structured, but not controlling. And then a trauma-informed practitioner is highly tuned and highly responsive. So it's about having that deep relationship building, not only with students, but with families, to be attuned enough to know when a student is not meeting the expectation when the bar is really high and pushing them accordingly. But like Nicole said, if students don't have that relational safety, don't have the conditions for learning that a trauma informed environment can set, then giving them that extra push can be a little bit more challenging, especially those cognitive pushes that we need for in order for them to access academics. But in fact, I, as a teacher leader before I moved into coaching, had one of the most structured, most accountable and strictest classrooms. But what you would not see was exclusion. So I think it's about really understanding that consequences don't always mean sending kids out of the classroom.
Nicole, did you want to add anything to that?
I think Angie really captured it well, especially when I think of that exclusion piece and holding all students accountable. When students see other students, all of their peers in the same space being held to the same standard, that is really powerful for all of those students to see, especially if they've gone through multiple grade years together, knowing that, some students are allowed to behave in one certain way, but not others. Or this student typically has a relationship with their teacher that looks like this. Having a standardized consequence system across the classroom it just promotes equality and equity.
So one thing that we like to do on Coffee Break School Psychology is provide people with a little extra espresso shot of knowledge, if you will. And I'd love for you to leave our listeners with some sort of parting wisdom, something that, if they remember nothing from this, remember this one thing about trauma-informed practices.
Yes, so I often will share this in conversations with other educators, but it's important to remember when we think about trauma-informed best practices and social and emotional learning is that it is not something that is added to the plate. This is the plate in post-pandemic education. And so I think it's really about the reframe of another thing as opposed to an essential component.
Mm-hmm. Right, stressed out kids can't learn very well. So if we set
Exactly.
the stage for learning through social, emotional, and trauma-informed lenses, then really it's the gift you give your class and yourself, because you're going to actually have the time and space to teach academics when kids are regulated.
Exactly. Yeah.
Um,
When you create the conditions for learning, then achievement can follow.
yeah, it's wonderful. Nicole, did you have any pearls of wisdom that you want to share with everyone before we go?
Also, just want to add that those parent phone calls that we talked about, it might seem extra on your plate, but it really is impactful and can produce better outcomes for your students and your relationships. Like, you will see that really pay forward in every aspect of your classroom environment when you make those positive phone calls home.
Yeah, and even if they don't answer because they see the school and they're like, oh, yeah, no, I'm not getting that.
Hmm.
Leaving a voice message is a
Hmm.
way to do that as well. And, if you pick, what, one kid a day, like, it seems pretty doable, just like right after. I mean, it seems like a pretty doable practice in the first couple weeks. I know a lot's going on, but
Right.
it can probably do a lot to just build that, like, we're in this together rapport, and I'm not going to only call you when things go awry, especially if families have a
Exactly.
history of every time they see the schools, they're like, oh, what now?
Right. And just to build on that, like, not make assumptions about what's going on. We're all human, and in a school building, it's an environment for, hearsay and gossip, but really going into building those parent relationships with an open mind, and making the best effort to connect to them. So whether that's leaving a voicemail, or if you learn that texting is the best way, getting a Google Voice number and reaching out that way.
Yeah, and some parents only use WhatsApp, and so it's really about
Hmm.
understanding your parent need and things like that. Well, this has been really great. I would love for people to be able to access more of your wisdom. Is there a place where they can go to share socials or websites that they can go to or resources that you want to share with everyone?
Yes. Well, our website is easy to find us. It's livewelled.org. We're also available on Instagram at livewell_ed. And both of those places have ways that they can reach out to us, DM us. We also have an email address. It's letsgrow@livewelled.org. So we're always super open to connecting to either new clients, people that might be interested in working with us, community organizations, or people that want to partner, like the good work that you do here at Thrive.
All right. Well, cheers to you all. We're not about having
Cheers.
a
Cheers.
coffee at 5 p.m. It's been wonderful to have you on Coffee Break School Psychology, and thank you all for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.